At 16 years old, Liam Parker had already learned what it felt like to be forgotten. He wasn't just poor. He wasn't just alone. He was the kind of boy most people stopped noticing. No father, no mother, no family waiting for him at home. Most days he survived by hauling fishing nets, unloading boats, and doing whatever work the harbor could offer. And every night he fell asleep wondering if life would ever become more than a struggle to make it through another day. Then one morning, Liam made a decision that shocked everyone in town. Instead of staying on the mainland, he moved to a tiny forgotten island, sitting alone beyond the bay. No electricity, no neighbors, no stores, no help. Just an abandoned shack, endless ocean, and the constant challenge of surviving another day. People laughed. Some said he wouldn't last a week. Others gave him a month. But Liam stayed. He learned how to fish, how to collect rainwater, how to survive storms powerful enough to tear roofs from buildings. And for a while, the island became the only home he had ever known. Then, years later, after a violent storm ripped through the coast, Liam discovered a hidden chest buried beneath the floorboards of the old shack. Inside was a journal, a map, and a secret that had remained hidden for generations. Because according to the documents he found, the island wasn't abandoned at all. It belonged to someone, and the closer Liam came to discovering who that person was, the more he realized the answer might change his entire life forever. But before we sail out to that forgotten island, I'd love to hear from you. Where are you listening from today? What time is it where you are right now? Maybe you're listening from Arkansas, Ohio, Texas, Miami, Florida, California, New York, or somewhere completely different around the world. Let me know in the comments below. I always enjoy seeing where these stories reach and hearing from listeners across different cities, states, and countries. And if you enjoy survival stories, hidden mysteries, remote islands, forgotten secrets, and incredible second-chance journeys, take a moment to subscribe to the channel and join our growing community. Now, let's go back to the day a poor boy stepped onto a forgotten island with nothing but hope, and unknowingly began the journey that would reveal who truly owned it. By the time Liam Parker turned 16, most people in Harbor's Edge knew him simply as the boy who never seemed to belong anywhere. He wasn't trouble. He wasn't lazy. In fact, he worked harder than most grown men on the docks. The problem was that nobody felt responsible for him. His parents had died years earlier in a fishing accident during a winter storm. Since then, Liam had drifted between distant relatives, temporary arrangements, and spare rooms offered out of obligation rather than affection. Every place eventually came with the same message: time to move on. On a gray October morning, Liam arrived at the harbor before sunrise, as usual. The docks were already alive with activity. Fishing boats rocked gently against their moorings. Seagulls screamed overhead. Men shouted across the water while unloading crates of bait and supplies. Liam preferred arriving early. Fewer people asked questions when they were busy. He grabbed a pair of work gloves and started helping old Ben Turner untangle several damaged nets. Ben was one of the few people in town who treated him like a person instead of a problem. "You're late," Ben joked. Liam checked the sky. "It's still dark." "Exactly." The old fisherman laughed and tossed him a coil of rope. For the next several hours, they worked side by side. The job wasn't glamorous. Wet ropes, cold fingers, salt water everywhere. But it paid enough for Liam to eat. Some weeks. That was all he asked for. Around midday, a storm warning came across the harbor radio. Fishermen immediately began discussing weather conditions. Most planned to stay close to shore for the next few days. Autumn storms could arrive quickly and leave destruction behind. Liam listened while repairing a torn section of net. He had learned more about survival from fishermen than from school. The ocean didn't reward carelessness. Neither did life. Later that afternoon, Liam stopped at a small grocery store to buy food. His entire budget allowed for bread, canned soup, and a few apples. At the register, he counted coins twice before handing them over. The cashier pretended not to notice. By evening, he returned to the tiny room he rented above a bait shop. The room measured barely large enough for a bed, a chair, and a narrow dresser. Still, it was shelter. Unfortunately, that shelter disappeared the following morning. The bait shop owner, Mr. Grayson, knocked on the door shortly after breakfast. The man looked uncomfortable. That alone told Liam everything he needed to know. "My nephew's moving back," Grayson explained. "Needs the room." Liam nodded before the conversation could become awkward. He had heard similar explanations before. Some were true, others weren't. Either way, the result remained the same. By sunset, his belongings sat packed inside 2 bags. Again. That evening, Liam walked along the harbor searching for options. The town felt smaller than ever. Every building contained people with somewhere to go. Every light glowing behind a window belonged to someone. He continued walking until he reached the northern pier where older fishermen sometimes gathered after work. That's where he overheard the conversation that changed everything. "Nobody's lived there in decades." "Can't blame them. Storm takes half of it every winter." Liam slowed his pace. The men were discussing something offshore, an island, small, forgotten, barely visible from town on clear days. Black Gull Island. According to the fishermen, an abandoned shack still stood there. Barely. Most people avoided the place because docking a boat safely could be difficult during rough weather. One man claimed smugglers used it generations ago. Another insisted the island was cursed. A third laughed at both stories and said the only thing dangerous about Black Gull Island was boredom. Liam listened quietly from a distance. Then he looked toward the dark shape resting on the harbor. The island seemed insignificant compared to the ocean surrounding it. Yet one thought refused to leave his mind. Nobody lived there. Nobody wanted it. Nobody would ask him to leave. The idea followed him throughout the night. By morning, it had become a plan. Liam spent the next several days gathering information, borrowing maps, asking questions, studying tides. Most people assumed he was simply curious. Only Ben Turner noticed something different. "You're thinking about that island, aren't you?" the old fisherman asked one evening. Liam hesitated. "Maybe." Ben stared across the harbor toward the distant shoreline barely visible beneath sunset. "Most folks spend their lives trying to get off islands. Maybe that's because they have somewhere else to go." The answer surprised both of them. Ben remained silent for several moments before finally nodding. "Fair point." 2 days later, Liam stood on the dock beside a battered rowboat loaded with supplies. Not many supplies. Just enough. Blankets, fishing gear, basic tools, food for several days. Everything he owned fit inside the boat. The morning air smelled of salt and rain. Dark clouds gathered far beyond the horizon. Several fishermen watched from nearby docks. Most looked skeptical. A few looked concerned. Ben handed Liam a small compass before departure. "You'll need this more than I do." Liam accepted it carefully. The old fisherman then pointed toward Black Gull Island, resting quietly in the distance. "You know, nobody's been out there in years." Liam smiled faintly. "Sounds peaceful." Ben laughed. "Or lonely." The tide was beginning to turn. It was time to leave. Liam climbed into the boat and pushed away from the dock. Harbor's edge gradually shrank behind him. The town, the harbor, the only life he had ever known. Ahead waited an abandoned island, an uncertain future, and a decision that would change everything. What Liam didn't know was that the forgotten island held secrets of its own. And before long, it would reveal why nobody had ever truly abandoned it. The trip to Black Gull Island took longer than Liam expected. What looked like a short distance from shore felt much larger once he was alone on open water. The old rowboat creaked with every wave. Salt spray soaked his jacket. More than once he wondered if everyone in Harbor's Edge had been right. Maybe the entire idea was foolish. Yet every time doubt appeared, he looked back toward town. The shrinking shoreline reminded him there wasn't much waiting for him there either. By late afternoon, the island finally rose clearly from the sea. Black Gull Island wasn't large. A few rocky beaches wrapped around its edges. Thick pine trees covered most of the interior. Near the center stood a weathered wooden shack, leaning slightly toward the ocean, as if years of storms had slowly pushed it off balance. The sight wasn't encouraging. If anything, the building looked worse than the stories suggested. Landing proved to be the first challenge. Waves crashed against jagged rocks surrounding much of the shoreline. Liam spent nearly an hour searching before finding a narrow inlet sheltered from the strongest currents. Even then, bringing the boat ashore required careful timing. One mistake could have smashed the vessel against the rocks. When his boots finally touched solid ground, relief washed through him. The island felt strangely quiet. No voices, no harbor sounds, no distant traffic, just wind moving through trees and seabirds circling overhead. For the first time in years, Liam was completely alone. He hauled his supplies up a small slope toward the shack. Up close, the structure revealed decades of neglect. Several roof shingles were missing. One window had been boarded over. The front door hung slightly crooked. Yet the building still stood. That alone felt impressive considering the storms it must have survived. Inside, things weren't much better. Dust covered nearly every surface. A rusted stove occupied one corner. Part of the ceiling showed water damage. Mice had clearly claimed ownership long ago. Liam dropped his bags and slowly walked through the single-room structure. It smelled of damp wood, salt air, and age. Most people would have turned around immediately. Liam smiled. Compared to some places he'd stayed before, this wasn't bad. The first evening disappeared beneath basic survival tasks. He cleaned enough floor space for his sleeping bag. He checked the roof for major leaks. He gathered driftwood from the shoreline. Most importantly, he located fresh water. A small spring bubbled from a hillside about 200 yards from the shack. Discovering it felt like finding treasure. Fresh water meant he could stay longer than a few days. Maybe much longer. As darkness approached, he lit a small fire inside the old stove. The warmth spread slowly through the room. Outside, waves crashed against the island's rocky shore. Inside, shadows danced across the walls. The shack felt less abandoned now, less hostile. That night, Liam slept better than expected. Exhaustion helped. So did the strange sense of freedom growing inside him. Nobody was going to tell him to leave. Nobody was going to remind him he was temporary. For the first time, the future felt uncertain in a way that wasn't entirely frightening. The next morning introduced him to reality. Survival on an island demanded work. Constant work. The roof leaked during a brief rain shower. The stove smoked badly whenever the wind shifted. The shoreline offered plenty of fish, but catching them proved harder than expected. By noon, Liam's hands were blistered from hauling supplies and repairing sections of the shack. Yet every completed task made the place feel more like home. During the afternoon, he explored farther inland. The island turned out to be larger than it appeared from the water. Dense pines covered much of the center. Narrow animal trails wound through the undergrowth. Rabbits darted between bushes. Seabirds nested among rocky cliffs overlooking the ocean. While following one trail, Liam discovered something unexpected. A stone well hidden beneath vines and moss. The structure looked old, very old. Someone had built it decades earlier, maybe longer. Curious, he examined the surrounding area. Several flat stones formed what looked like part of an old foundation nearby. Not enough to identify the original structure, just enough to suggest people once lived here. The discovery stayed with him as he returned to the shack. According to everyone in Harbor's Edge, the island had been abandoned forever. Yet wells don't appear by accident. Neither do foundations. Someone had called this place home long before him. That evening brought another challenge. Wind, stronger than anything he experienced on the mainland. Gusts slammed against the shack repeatedly after sunset. The walls groaned. The roof rattled. At one point, Liam stepped outside to secure a loose section of tarp covering supplies near the beach. Standing there beneath a sky filled with stars, he suddenly understood why so few people wanted to live here. The island demanded respect. It tested every weakness. Yet strangely, that made him like it even more. Back inside, he heated canned soup over the stove and studied a rough map of the island he had started sketching. Freshwater spring, rabbit trails, fishing spots, shelter. Little by little, he was learning the island's secrets. Then a loud crash echoed from somewhere beyond the trees. Liam froze immediately. The sound didn't come from the shack. It came from deeper inside the island. For several seconds, he listened carefully. Silence followed. Then another noise. Faint, metallic, almost like something heavy striking stone. He stepped outside with a lantern and scanned the darkness. Nothing moved. Nothing appeared unusual. Eventually, he returned inside and locked the door. Yet long after midnight, while wind howled around the shack, Liam found himself thinking about the old well, the hidden foundation, and the strange noise from the forest. Because the longer he stayed on Black Gull Island, the less abandoned it seemed. The strange noise from the forest bothered Liam far more than he wanted to admit. The island was supposed to be empty. That was the entire reason he came here. Empty islands weren't supposed to produce metallic crashes in the middle of the night. Yet when morning arrived, practical concerns pushed the mystery aside. Survival came first. Curiosity could wait. Food could not. The first challenge of the day was breakfast. His canned supplies wouldn't last forever, which meant he needed reliable sources of food. The ocean surrounded him with opportunity, but turning fish into meals required skill he was still learning. Shortly after sunrise, Liam carried his fishing gear to a rocky section of shoreline he had noticed the previous afternoon. Waves crashed against the cliffs below, while seabirds circled overhead. The spot looked promising. Unfortunately, promising and productive turned out to be different things. For nearly 2 hours, he caught absolutely nothing. Several fish stole bait without touching the hook. One snapped his line completely. Another nearly pulled the rod from his hands before escaping. By late morning, frustration had replaced confidence. Then, just as he considered giving up, The line jerked sharply. This time, the fish stayed attached. The struggle lasted several minutes. When Liam finally pulled a large sea bass onto the rocks, he laughed out loud. It wasn't just a fish. It was proof he could survive here. The victory improved his mood considerably. The next several days settled into a routine. Every morning began with work, collecting water from the spring, gathering firewood, checking fishing lines, repairing the shack. Every afternoon involved exploring new sections of the island. Slowly, Black Gull Island revealed itself. The eastern shore offered the best fishing. The northern cliffs attracted nesting seabirds. A small grove near the center produced wild berries during warmer months, according to old signs of growth. Survival became easier as knowledge increased. Yet the island continued providing small mysteries. On the fourth day, Liam returned to the old well he discovered earlier. This time he examined it more carefully. The stonework showed remarkable craftsmanship. Whoever built it knew what they were doing. More interesting were several markings carved into the surrounding stones. Most were too weathered to read clearly. One symbol remained visible, a letter H enclosed inside a circle. Liam traced the carving with his fingers. The mark felt deliberate, like a signature. Nearby, he uncovered additional evidence of former inhabitants: rusted nails, pieces of broken pottery, fragments of old glass bottles buried beneath soil and roots. None of it seemed valuable. Yet together they painted a picture. People once lived here, not visitors, residents, families perhaps. The island carried history no one in Harbor's Edge ever mentioned. Later that week, a storm rolled across the bay. Not a major storm, just enough wind and rain to remind Liam how exposed the island truly was. He spent an entire afternoon reinforcing sections of the shack with driftwood and rope. During the worst of the weather, he sat inside listening to rain hammer the roof. The old building groaned beneath each gust. Several leaks appeared. One section of wall rattled alarmingly. Yet the shack survived. So did he. That evening brought an unexpected visitor. Liam spotted the boat approaching shortly before sunset. At first he assumed he was imagining things. Nobody came to Black Gull Island, yet the vessel continued moving steadily toward shore. Excitement mixed with caution. He hadn't spoken to another person in nearly a week. The boat eventually landed near the small inlet. An elderly fisherman climbed out carrying a crate. Liam immediately recognized him. Captain Henry Ward, one of the oldest fishermen in Harbor's Edge. The man spent more time on the water than on land. "Figured you'd either be dead or starving by now," Henry announced cheerfully while hauling the crate ashore. Liam laughed. "Good to see you too." The crate contained supplies: flour, coffee, fishing hooks, several jars of preserved vegetables. Liam stared in disbelief. "Why?" Henry shrugged. "Because somebody helped me when I was young." The old fisherman stayed for dinner. They shared freshly caught fish cooked over the stove while darkness settled outside. Conversation flowed easily. Henry possessed endless stories about storms, shipwrecks, and life at sea. Yet when Liam mentioned the old well and foundation hidden inland, the captain grew noticeably quieter. "You found the well?" he asked. Liam nodded. Henry stared into the fire for several moments. "My grandfather used to talk about that place." Liam sat up straighter. "What place?" The old fisherman hesitated. "There was supposed to be a settlement here a long time ago." "What happened to it?" Henry shrugged. "Depends who tells the story." Not exactly an answer. Still, it was more information than Liam had before. Before leaving the next morning, Henry offered one final piece of advice. If you keep exploring, pay attention to the western side of the island. Liam frowned. Why? The old fisherman secured a rope inside his boat, because that's where people stopped asking questions. Then he pushed away from shore. The answer made no sense. Yet throughout the day, Liam found himself thinking about it. Eventually, curiosity won. Late that afternoon, he hiked toward the western side of Black Gull Island. The terrain grew rougher as he traveled. Dense trees covered much of the area. Rocky outcroppings overlooked the sea. Then, near sunset, he discovered something strange. Hidden beneath vines and moss stood the remains of a stone chimney, not attached to any visible building, just a chimney rising alone from the forest floor. As Liam approached, he noticed something partially buried beside it. Metal, rusted, artificial. Kneeling down, he cleared away leaves and dirt. Slowly, the corner of an old iron box emerged from the ground. The same moment his fingers touched the metal, a thought crossed his mind. Maybe Black Gull Island hadn't been forgotten at all. Maybe somebody wanted it that way. Liam stood beside the rusted iron box for nearly a full minute before touching it again. The sun was already sinking toward the horizon, painting the western side of the island in shades of gold and orange. Common sense told him to return to the shack before dark. Curiosity told him something else. Curiosity won. Kneeling beside the box, he used a piece of driftwood to scrape away decades of dirt and roots. The container appeared smaller than he first thought, perhaps the size of a toolbox. Rust covered every surface. One hinge had nearly disintegrated. When Liam finally pried the lid open, a cloud of dust escaped into the air. Inside, he found almost nothing. No treasure, no gold coins, no mysterious artifacts, just a few water-damaged papers and a brass compass wrapped in faded cloth. For a moment, disappointment settled over him. Then he unfolded one of the papers. Most of the writing had faded beyond recognition, yet a few words remained visible. Property Survey, Black Gull Island, 1947. Liam's pulse quickened slightly. The document wasn't valuable in the traditional sense, but it proved something important. Someone once cared enough about the island to survey it officially. The second paper revealed even less. A partial map, a few measurements, several initials written near the bottom. H.W. The same letter H he had discovered near the old well. Before he could examine the documents further, darkness began swallowing the forest. Reluctantly, Liam packed everything into his backpack and started the long walk back to the shack. The trip proved more difficult than expected. The western side of the island looked entirely different at night. Shadows stretched between trees, branches scraped against one another in the wind. More than once, Liam thought he heard footsteps nearby, only to discover rabbits darting through undergrowth. By the time he reached home, he was exhausted, yet sleep remained impossible. The papers occupied the table beside his lantern. Every few minutes, he found himself reading them again, looking for clues, looking for names, looking for anything that explained why people once lived on the island. The following morning brought a storm warning. Dark clouds gathered offshore before sunrise. Captain Henry's stories echoed in Liam's mind as he secured supplies around the shack. Island life demanded preparation. Storms didn't care whether you were ready. They arrived anyway. By noon, heavy rain hammered the roof. Wind rattled the walls. Waves crashed violently against the shoreline. Liam spent hours reinforcing weak sections of the shack with spare lumber and rope. At one point, a powerful gust tore loose part of the roof covering the storage area outside. He sprinted into the rain to secure it before losing valuable supplies. The work left him soaked and shivering. Yet when evening arrived, everything remained intact. Another small survival victory. As the storm continued through the night, Liam studied the compass recovered from the iron box. Unlike the papers, it remained in excellent condition. Someone clearly cared for it before hiding it away. Turning it over in his hands, he noticed tiny letters engraved along the back. Property of Harold Whitaker. Liam immediately sat upright. A full name, finally. The initials made sense now. H.W. Harold Whitaker. Whoever he was, his name appeared connected to both the compass and the survey documents. The discovery felt significant. The next morning, the storm finally passed. Sunlight returned. So did something unexpected. A boat. Liam spotted it while collecting water from the spring. At first, he assumed Captain Henry had returned. The vessel was different, larger, newer. The boat approached slowly before anchoring offshore. Two men stepped onto the beach. Neither looked familiar. Both wore expensive outdoor clothing that seemed strangely out of place on Black Gull Island. Liam immediately felt cautious. Visitors were rare enough. Unknown visitors were even rarer. The men noticed him and waved. "Didn't expect anyone living out here," one called. Liam approached carefully. "Same could be said about you." The older man laughed politely. "Fair enough." He introduced himself as Richard Bell. According to his story, he and his companion were researching coastal history. They asked several questions about the island. Had Liam found any old structures, any artifacts, any records? The questions sounded casual, yet something about them felt rehearsed, too specific. Liam answered cautiously. He mentioned the well, the old foundation. Nothing else. The moment he mentioned the western side of the island, Richard's expression changed almost imperceptibly, just a brief flicker. Yet Liam noticed. "Interesting," the man said. "Very interesting." The conversation ended shortly afterward. The visitors returned to their boat and departed. Yet instead of heading back toward Harbor's Edge, they circled around the northern shoreline and disappeared from view. Liam watched until they vanished completely. Then he looked down at the compass hidden inside his jacket pocket. His instincts told him something important. Those men hadn't come looking for history. They had come looking for something specific, something connected to Black Gull Island. That evening, determined to learn more, Liam returned to the iron box documents. This time he examined the partial survey map under brighter light. After nearly an hour, he noticed something he had missed before. Near the northern cliffs, a small symbol appeared beside a handwritten note. The writing was faded but still readable. Private property. Owner records stored below. Liam stared at the words, then looked toward the dark northern side of the island beyond the shack window. Somewhere out there was a place where ownership records had been hidden, and judging by the questions asked by Richard Bell and his companion, other people were searching for them too. The words on the faded survey map stayed in Liam's mind long after he extinguished the lantern that night. Private property. Owner records stored below. He must have read the sentence 20 times before finally falling asleep. Every possibility seemed equally unbelievable. Why would ownership records be hidden on a forgotten island? Who was Harold Whitaker? And why had those two strangers seemed so interested in the island's history? The next morning, Liam woke before sunrise. The ocean was calm for the first time in days. A thin layer of fog drifted across the shoreline. Conditions were perfect for exploring the northern cliffs. He packed food, water, rope, the brass compass, and the partial survey map. Then he headed north. The terrain quickly became more difficult than anything he had crossed before. Sharp rocks lined much of the coast. Thick undergrowth forced constant detours. Several times, Liam had to climb over fallen trees blocking narrow paths. Survival on the island had already improved his stamina, but by mid-morning, he was sweating despite the cool air. Eventually, the forest thinned and the cliffs appeared. Massive walls of stone rose directly from the sea. Waves crashed against them far below. The view was breathtaking. It was also dangerous. One careless step could mean a fatal fall. Liam spent nearly an hour comparing the survey map with visible landmarks. Most of the island had changed over time. Trees grew where open ground once existed. Trails disappeared. Yet one feature remained unchanged. A narrow stone outcrop, shaped almost like an arrow pointing toward the ocean. The same formation appeared on the map. Excitement surged through him. He was close. Following the map's directions, he carefully descended along a rocky ledge. The path ended near a hidden cove invisible from above. The small beach sat protected beneath towering cliffs. Driftwood covered much of the sand. Seabirds nested among the rocks. At first glance, nothing seemed unusual. Then Liam noticed something strange. A section of cliff wall looked different from the surrounding stone. Smoother, straighter, almost artificial. He approached cautiously. Vines covered most of the surface. Pulling them aside revealed weathered wooden planks embedded directly into the rock. A door. His heart immediately began racing. Somebody had hidden a door inside the cliff. The wood looked ancient. Salt and weather had damaged much of it, yet it remained intact. Liam pulled. Nothing happened. He pushed. Still nothing. Eventually, he discovered a rusted metal latch concealed beneath a layer of moss. After several minutes of effort, the mechanism finally released with a loud crack. The sound echoed through the cove. Slowly, the door swung inward. Darkness waited beyond. Liam lit his lantern and stepped inside. The chamber proved larger than expected. Dry, cool, protected from storms. Shelves lined portions of the walls. Most had collapsed long ago. Wooden crates sat scattered across the floor. Many were empty. Others contained supplies ruined by time. Yet one object immediately caught Liam's attention. A metal lockbox resting on a stone table near the rear of the cave. Unlike everything else, it appeared well preserved, almost deliberately protected. He crossed the room quickly. The box was locked. Not surprising. What was surprising was the keyhole. It matched the brass key attached to Harold Whitaker's compass. Liam froze, then slowly removed the compass from his pocket. The key hung exactly where he left it. For several moments, he simply stared at it. Then he inserted the key. The lock clicked instantly. The sound seemed impossibly loud inside the cave. Carefully, Liam opened the lid. Inside rested several documents wrapped in oilcloth. Beneath them sat a leather-bound journal. The first page carried a name written in elegant handwriting, Harold Whitaker. Liam's pulse quickened. He flipped through several pages, property records, maps, personal notes. Then one sentence near the beginning caught his eye. If you are reading this, You may be the first person to find these records in over 50 years. The journal explained that Harold Whitaker once lived on Black Gull Island. More importantly, he wasn't merely a resident. He was its legal caretaker. Several entries describe disputes over ownership, secret agreements, and concerns that certain records might disappear. The deeper Liam read, the stranger the story became. Then he found something that made him sit upright. A folded ownership certificate. Official, signed, stamped. According to the document, Black Gull Island belonged to a private family trust established generations earlier. Yet the owner section had been intentionally covered with additional paper glued over the original name. Someone had hidden the identity of the true owner. Before Liam could investigate further, a distant sound echoed from outside. Voices. Human voices. His blood ran cold. He extinguished the lantern immediately. Silence filled the cave. Then the voices came again, closer this time. At least 2 people, maybe 3. Someone had followed him to the northern cliffs. Liam carefully moved toward the entrance and peeked through a narrow gap beside the door. Below, on the beach, stood Richard Bell, and the same companion who had visited the island days earlier. They weren't wandering. They weren't sightseeing. They were searching, and judging by the way Richard studied the cliff face, he knew exactly what he was looking for. Suddenly, the mystery wasn't just about who owned Black Gull Island anymore. It was about why someone was still trying so hard to keep that secret hidden. Liam remained perfectly still inside the hidden cave. Through the narrow gap beside the door, he watched Richard Bell and his companion move across the beach below. The 2 men weren't behaving like historians anymore. They carried notebooks, maps, and small digging tools. More importantly, they moved with confidence. They knew something was hidden here. The only question was whether they knew exactly where. Liam slowly backed away from the entrance. His heart hammered so loudly he worried it might echo through the chamber. The journal, ownership certificate, and remaining documents sat scattered across the stone table. He had no time to read everything. If the men discovered the concealed door, the records could disappear forever. Quickly, he gathered the most important papers and stuffed them into his backpack. Then he paused. The journal. Something about it felt important, not just because it belonged to Harold Whitaker, because Harold clearly expected someone to find it one day. Liam opened the book to a section marked with a folded piece of paper. The entry immediately caught his attention. The island was never mine. I was only asked to protect it until the rightful heir returned. Liam frowned. He read the sentence again. Rightful heir. The phrase appeared several more times throughout the following pages, yet Harold never identified who that heir was. Instead, he described decades spent guarding records and preserving ownership documents, as if the island itself were being held in trust for someone else. A sudden scrape outside interrupted his thoughts. Someone was climbing toward the cliff entrance. Liam extinguished the lantern completely. Darkness swallowed the cave. For several seconds he could hear nothing except his own breathing. Then footsteps. Faint. Careful. One of the men had found the trail leading toward the hidden door. Panic surged through him. The cave offered only one visible entrance. If they came inside, there would be nowhere to hide. Then Liam remembered something he noticed earlier while exploring the chamber. A narrow passage near the rear wall. At the time, it seemed insignificant. Now it might save him. Moving carefully through the darkness, he felt his way toward the passage. The opening barely allowed him to squeeze through. Sharp stones scraped his jacket. His backpack caught twice. Yet eventually he emerged into a narrow tunnel extending deeper into the cliff. Behind him, another sound echoed, the hidden door opening. They had found the cave. Liam continued forward. The tunnel twisted through darkness for what felt like hundreds of feet. Eventually, daylight appeared ahead. Relief washed over him. A second exit. The passage emerged near the top of the cliffs overlooking the sea. Hidden from below, invisible unless someone knew where to look, Harold Whitaker clearly planned escape routes as carefully as he hid secrets. Liam crouched behind a cluster of rocks and looked back toward the beach. Richard and his companion were entering the cave below. They had no idea he escaped. Not yet. The discovery bought him time, nothing more. By sunset, Liam returned to the shack exhausted. The day had transformed everything. What began as a mystery about ownership had become something larger. People were actively searching for the records, people willing to travel to a forgotten island and dig through hidden caves. That level of determination usually meant one thing. The truth mattered. The following morning brought another challenge. Supplies were running low. Living alone on the island meant constant maintenance. Fish needed catching, water needed collecting, firewood needed gathering. Survival didn't pause simply because a mystery became interesting. Liam spent most of the day working, yet his thoughts never strayed far from Harold's journal. That evening, after cooking dinner, he finally continued reading. Several entries described life on the island decades earlier. Others detailed shipments arriving from the mainland. Then Liam discovered something unexpected. A photograph tucked between two pages. The image showed a large family standing in front of a grand coastal house. Children, parents, grandparents, everyone dressed formally. Written on the back were 6 words. The Ashford family, true owners of Black Gull Island. Liam sat upright immediately. Finally, a name. Ashford. The mystery owner wasn't a corporation or government agency, it was a family. Yet Harold's notes suggested the family vanished from local records long ago. One entry described a tragedy at sea. Another mentioned legal disputes. Gradually, the story emerged. The Ashfords once owned large portions of the coastline, including Black Gull Island. Then something happened. The family scattered, records disappeared, ownership became unclear. Harold stepped in as caretaker. The deeper Liam read, the stranger everything became. Then he reached the final completed journal entry. Unlike the others, the handwriting looked rushed, nervous. If anyone is reading this, know that the heir may not even realize who they are. The island will recognize them before they recognize themselves. Liam blinked. The sentence made no sense. Islands didn't recognize people. Yet Harold clearly believed otherwise. He continued reading. Unfortunately, the remaining pages had been torn out. Every single one. Someone removed them deliberately. Frustrated, Liam closed the journal and stared into the fire. Then a movement outside caught his eye. Instantly he froze. A lantern glow moved between the trees. Not near the beach, not near the shoreline. Near the shack. Someone was on the island after dark, slowly walking through the forest toward his home. And judging by the direction, they already knew exactly where to find him. Liam extinguished the lantern immediately. Darkness swallowed the shack, leaving only the faint glow of moonlight filtering through gaps in the wooden walls. He stood perfectly still, listening. Outside, the distant surf rolled against the shoreline. Wind moved through the pines. Then he heard it again. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Someone was definitely approaching. His pulse quickened. Instinct told him to stay quiet. The island had taught him many things over the past months, and one of them was that not every problem could be solved by rushing toward it. Carefully, he moved to the side of the window and peeked through a narrow crack in the boards. A lantern bobbed between the trees. The figure carrying it moved steadily toward the shack. For several tense seconds, Liam expected to see Richard Bell. Instead, the man who emerged into the clearing surprised him completely. Captain Henry Ward. The old fisherman looked exhausted. His coat was soaked with sea spraying. His boat was nowhere in sight. Liam opened the door immediately. "Henry." The old man stepped inside and shut the door behind him. "Good. You're alive." Liam frowned. "What happened?" Henry set the lantern on the table and removed his wet gloves. "Richard Bell happened." The answer instantly erased any remaining calm. Over the next several minutes, the old fisherman explained everything. After leaving the island days earlier, he began asking questions in Harbor's Edge. The more he learned about Richard Bell, the less he liked. According to local records, Bell wasn't a historian at all. He worked for a coastal development company attempting to acquire remote shoreline properties throughout the region. Several islands had already changed hands under suspicious circumstances. "He isn't interested in history," Henry said. "He's interested in ownership." Liam glanced toward Harold Whitaker's journal resting beside the stove. "Because of the island," Henry nodded. "Because whoever legally owns Black Gull Island controls a lot more than people realize." The old fisherman then revealed something even stranger. Several surveyors recently discovered evidence of rare mineral deposits beneath portions of the coastline surrounding the island. Nothing confirmed yet, but enough to attract investors. Suddenly, Richard's interest made sense. If ownership records disappeared, someone else could potentially claim the island. Someone with money and lawyers. Someone like Richard Bell. The conversation lasted late into the night. Eventually, Liam showed Henry the journal, the ownership certificate, and the Ashford family photograph. The old fisherman examined each item carefully. When he reached the photograph, he froze. "I've seen this house before." Liam sat upright. "Where?" Henry pointed toward a cliffside visible through the window. "On the mainland, about 20 miles north." The statement changed everything. According to Henry, the old Ashford estate still existed, though barely. Most of the property sat abandoned. Few people visited anymore. The family itself had vanished generations earlier, yet the house remained, watching, waiting. The following morning brought another storm, not severe enough to trap them indoors completely, but strong enough to complicate travel. Liam and Henry spent much of the day reinforcing the shack. Survival always came first. They secured fishing gear, covered firewood, checked the roof for damage. During one particularly strong gust, part of the western wall began rattling violently. Concerned, Liam removed several loose boards to inspect the structure. That's when he discovered something unexpected: a hidden compartment. The cavity sat inside the wall itself, small, concealed, deliberate. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Liam reached inside. His fingers brushed leather. Carefully, he pulled out a thin package wrapped in oilcloth. Inside rested several folded letters and a single photograph. The photograph immediately caught Henry's attention. It showed a young woman standing beside the same grand Ashford estate. Written on the back were 4 words: Eleanor Ashford, 1968. Beneath the photograph lay a letter addressed to Harold Whitaker. Liam unfolded it carefully. Most of the writing remained readable despite its age. As he read, the room grew silent. Eleanor explained that she was leaving the mainland permanently. She no longer trusted certain people searching for family records. More importantly, she feared someone intended to seize Black Gull Island if ownership documents disappeared. Then came the final sentence. If anything happens to me, protect the island until my grandson can be found. Liam read the line twice, then a third time. Grandson, the heir Harold kept mentioning, the rightful owner. Henry leaned forward slowly. There's more. Attached to the final page sat a torn section of a birth record. Most names were missing. Water damage obscured much of the document, yet one detail remained perfectly visible. A surname. Parker. Liam's breath caught in his throat. Parker. His surname. The same name he had carried his entire life. For several seconds, neither he nor Henry spoke. Outside, rain tapped softly against the roof. Inside, Liam stared at the document. Coincidence seemed impossible, yet the implications felt unbelievable. Before either could discuss it further, a boat horn echoed across the bay. Both rushed outside, beyond the shoreline. Emerging through the rain came a larger vessel than any Liam had seen near the island before. Through binoculars, Henry's expression darkened immediately. Richard Bell. Liam followed his gaze. Several people stood on the deck. Equipment crates filled the rear of the boat. They weren't visiting this time. They were arriving prepared, and judging by the direction of the vessel, they intended to stay for several minutes. Liam and Captain Henry stood in the rain watching Richard Bell's vessel approach the island. The boat moved with purpose, no hesitation, no uncertainty. Whoever was aboard already knew where they were going. The realization settled heavily in Liam's stomach. This was no longer a mystery being uncovered slowly. It had become a race. And for the first time, he suspected Richard Bell might be closer to the truth than anyone realized. The vessel anchored in a sheltered cove on the eastern side of the island. Through binoculars, Henry counted at least 5 people. Several immediately began unloading equipment. Not camping gear, survey equipment, metal cases, shovels, measuring tools. They're looking for documents, Henry muttered, or proof. Liam glanced toward the hidden letters resting inside the shack. The torn birth record, Eleanor Ashford's warning, Harold Whitaker's journal. All of it suddenly felt far more valuable than before. Yet survival still demanded attention. A stronger storm was moving toward the coast. Dark clouds stretched across the horizon. Wind continued building throughout the morning. The island had a way of forcing people to respect priorities. Before worrying about Richard Bell, Liam needed to make sure the shack could survive another storm. The next several hours disappeared beneath practical work. Together, he and Henry secured windows, reinforced weak sections of the roof, and moved supplies indoors. Several fishing nets had to be pulled from the shoreline before rough seas destroyed them. Every task felt urgent. Every minute mattered. By mid-afternoon, rain fell heavily. Richard's group remained active despite the weather. Through gaps in the trees, Liam occasionally spotted them moving equipment inland. The sight bothered him, not because they were searching, because they seemed confident, as though they already possessed information he didn't. That evening, while studying Harold Whitaker's journal again, Henry discovered something unusual. Several pages near the back contained numbers written in the margins. At first, they appeared random. Then Henry recognized them. Coordinates. Liam immediately spread the survey map across the table. After comparing the figures, a location emerged. The Western Cliffs, near the old stone chimney where the iron box had been buried. Another hiding place, Liam said quietly. Henry nodded. Or the real one. The possibility changed everything. The hidden cave contained records, but perhaps not all of them. Maybe Harold protected something even more important. Outside, thunder rumbled over the ocean. The storm had arrived. Travel after dark would have been reckless. They agreed to wait until morning. Unfortunately, nature had different plans. Around midnight, a violent gust slammed into the shack hard enough to wake them both instantly. The walls shook. One of the shutters tore loose. Rain sprayed through the opening. Liam grabbed a lantern while Henry fought to secure the damaged window. Another gust followed, then another. Within minutes, the island sat beneath one of the worst storms Liam had experienced since moving there. Survival instincts took over. They reinforced doors, moved supplies away from leaks, fed additional wood into the stove. For nearly 3 hours, the shack battled wind and rain. At one point, Liam genuinely wondered whether the entire structure might collapse. Then, just before dawn, the storm began weakening. Exhausted but relieved, he stepped outside to assess the damage. The island looked transformed. Branches littered the ground. Several trees had fallen. Waves still pounded the shoreline. Then Liam noticed something unusual near the western cliffs. Part of the hillside had collapsed during the storm. Fresh earth and exposed stone now marked the area. Immediately, he thought about the coordinates. By sunrise, he and Henry were heading west. The journey took longer than expected because storm debris blocked several trails. Eventually, they reached the old chimney. The scene stunned both of them. The landslide had exposed part of a stone structure hidden beneath the hillside. Not natural rock. Masonry. Human construction. A doorway partially emerged from the earth. Liam's pulse quickened immediately. This wasn't here before. Henry nodded slowly. No, it wasn't. Together, they cleared enough debris to enter. The structure proved smaller than the cave, but far more deliberate. It resembled a vault. Shelves lined the walls. Most were empty, yet one object remained. A wooden chest preserved surprisingly well. Liam opened it carefully. Inside rested additional journals, legal documents, and a sealed envelope marked with a single name. Eleanor Ashford. Beneath the envelope sat something else. A photograph. Liam picked it up. The image showed a woman holding a small child outside the Ashford estate. The woman was Eleanor. The child appeared no older than 2. Written on the back were 7 words that made Liam's heart stop. My grandson. Daniel Parker Ashford, age 2. Liam stared at the surname. Parker. His surname. The same surname appearing on the torn birth record. The same surname he had carried his entire life. Before he could process the discovery, a voice echoed from outside the vault. Looks like we finally found it. Liam froze. So did Henry. Slowly they turned toward the entrance. Richard Bell stood there smiling. Behind him were 3 members of his team. Somehow, despite the storm and the island, Richard had followed them, and judging by the expression on his face, he knew exactly what they had just discovered. For several seconds, nobody moved. Rainwater dripped from the stone ceiling of the vault. Wind howled faintly outside. Richard Bell stood in the entrance with the confidence of a man who believed the outcome had already been decided. Liam tightened his grip on the photograph without realizing it. Beside him, Captain Henry slowly stepped forward. "You should leave," the old fisherman said. Richard smiled. "If I wanted advice, Henry, I'd ask for it." The tension inside the small chamber became almost unbearable. Richard's companions remained silent, watching everything carefully. Then Richard's eyes settled on the photograph in Liam's hand. The smile widened. "Looks like you found what I've been searching for." Liam said nothing. Over the past months, the island had taught him patience. Sometimes silence revealed more than questions. Richard eventually sighed and stepped fully inside the vault. "You deserve to know the truth." Somehow, those words sounded less reassuring than threatening. According to Richard, his grandfather once worked with Harold Whitaker decades earlier. He claimed ownership disputes surrounding Black Gull Island never truly ended. Different families argued over records. Missing documents created confusion. Over time, several people attempted to prove ownership and failed. Richard insisted he was only trying to settle the matter permanently. The speech sounded reasonable, almost convincing, until Henry laughed. "That's not why you're here." Richard's expression hardened instantly. The mask slipped. Only briefly, but Liam noticed. "Then tell him," Henry said. "Tell him about the mineral surveys." Silence followed. Richard didn't answer. He didn't need to. The reaction said enough. Liam finally understood. The island wasn't valuable because of history. It wasn't valuable because of old property records. It was valuable because of what sat beneath the surrounding coastline. If Richard controlled ownership, he controlled everything else. "So you lied," Liam said quietly. Richard shrugged. "I simplified." The casual response irritated Liam more than anger would have. Before anyone could continue, another crack echoed through the vault. Loud, sharp. Everyone looked upward. The landslide that exposed the structure clearly hadn't stabilized completely. Small rocks tumbled from the ceiling. Dust drifted into the air. Richard glanced around uneasily. "We should continue this elsewhere." This time, nobody argued. The entire group exited the vault moments before another section of the hillside shifted. More rocks collapsed behind them. The doorway partially disappeared beneath fresh debris. Had they waited another minute, everyone might have been trapped inside. The near disaster changed the atmosphere immediately. Survival took priority again. Storm runoff transformed portions of the island into mud and unstable ground. Returning safely to the shack required caution. Several times people slipped. Once Richard's companion nearly fell down a rocky embankment before Liam grabbed his arm. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. By the time everyone reached the shack, darkness was approaching. Another storm band moved across the ocean. Nobody wanted to travel by boat under those conditions. Reluctantly, Richard and his team accepted Henry's offer to stay overnight. The arrangement felt strange. Enemies sharing shelter because the island demanded it. Yet Black Gull Island rarely cared about human disagreements. That evening, the small shack felt crowded for the first time in Liam's life. Rain tapped against the roof while people shared coffee and sat around the stove. Nobody discussed ownership. Nobody mentioned the photograph. Instead, conversation drifted toward weather, fishing, and island survival. For a few hours, everyone behaved like ordinary people. The experience surprised Liam. Richard laughed at jokes, helped repair a loose shutter, shared stories about traveling the coastline. It became harder to see him as a villain, easier to see him as a person making questionable choices. Later that night, After most people slept, Liam finally examined the remaining documents from the vault. One item immediately caught his attention: a sealed envelope addressed to Eleanor Ashford. Unlike everything else, it had never been opened. Carefully, he broke the seal. Inside rested a letter from Harold Whitaker. The handwriting appeared shaky, older, near the end of his life. Liam read slowly. The contents changed everything. Harold explained that Eleanor's grandson had been sent away after a family tragedy to protect him. Several people were searching for ownership records even then. Harold feared the child would become a target if his identity became public. Therefore, official records were altered, names changed, connections hidden. One sentence stopped Liam completely. The boy was placed with the Parker family until the danger passed. Liam stared at the page. Parker. Again. His hands began trembling slightly. The letter continued: if the child ever returns to Black Gull Island, the island will have brought him home. For several seconds, Liam simply sat there. Rain continued falling outside. The stove crackled softly across the room. Everyone slept, yet nothing felt the same anymore. The photograph, the birth record, the surname, Harold's warning, all of it pointed toward the same conclusion. Liam wasn't just connected to the island was connected to him. Then he noticed something else tucked inside the envelope. A tiny photograph, faded but recognizable. A young woman holding a toddler on a beach. Eleanor Ashford and her grandson. Liam turned the picture over. On the back, written in Eleanor's handwriting, were 6 simple words. For Liam, when he comes home. His breath caught. He read the sentence again, then again. Outside, thunder rolled across the bay. Inside, Liam realized the mystery surrounding Black Gull Island was no longer about discovering who owned it. He already knew the answer. The real question now was what he was going to do with that truth when morning arrived. Morning arrived beneath clear skies for the first time in days. The storm had finally passed. Sunlight reflected across the ocean, turning the water into a field of silver. Yet despite the beauty outside, Liam barely noticed it. He sat alone on the shoreline holding Eleanor Ashford's photograph. The words written on the back replayed endlessly in his mind. For Liam, when he comes home. Home. Nobody had ever used that word for him before. Not truly. Foster homes were temporary. Spare rooms were temporary. The island was supposed to be temporary too. Yet somehow it had become the only place where he ever felt he belonged. Behind him, the shack slowly came to life. Richard Bell and his crew prepared their boat. Captain Henry brewed coffee. The atmosphere felt different now. Calmer. The mystery was no longer hidden. It simply needed to be accepted. Shortly after breakfast, Liam gathered everyone inside the shack. Harold Whitaker's journal sat open on the table. Beside it rested Eleanor's letters, the ownership records, the photographs, and the surviving legal documents. One by one, they reviewed everything. There were no dramatic revelations left, only evidence. Names, dates, records. Together they told a remarkably simple story. Black Gull Island belonged to the Ashford family. Harold Whitaker had protected it for decades. Eleanor Ashford had hidden the final records, and Liam Parker, through a chain of events stretching back generations, was the last surviving heir. When the discussion ended, silence filled the room. Richard Bell finally leaned back in his chair. "Well," he said quietly, Looks like the island has an owner after all. The admission surprised everyone, most of all Liam. Richard stared at the documents for several moments before continuing. My grandfather spent years trying to find those records. He laughed softly. Turns out we were looking in the wrong places. For the first time, there was no argument in his voice, no ambition, just resignation. Sometimes the truth leaves very little room for negotiation. The following week became one of the busiest periods of Liam's life. Historians arrived from the mainland. Surveyors reviewed the records. Lawyers verified ownership documents. Reporters even visited Harbor's Edge after hearing rumors about the island. Through it all, Liam remained strangely detached. The attention felt unreal. What mattered to him wasn't ownership, it was understanding. Every document revealed another piece of the island's forgotten history. Families who once lived there, children who played along the shoreline, generations who considered Black Gull Island home. For years, the island had seemed lonely. Now Liam understood it had once been full of life. Captain Henry stayed involved throughout the process. So did several older residents from Harbor's Edge who remembered fragments of the old stories. Piece by piece, the island's history returned. More importantly, people finally stopped treating Black Gull Island as a forgotten place. One afternoon, nearly a month later, Liam traveled with Henry to the abandoned Ashford estate on the mainland. The old house stood overlooking the sea exactly as Henry described, weathered, empty, yet beautiful. Inside, they discovered additional photographs and family records connecting directly to the documents found on the island. For Liam, the experience felt less like uncovering a fortune and more like meeting relatives he never knew existed. Every photograph, every letter, every story filled another empty space in his life. Summer arrived gradually. The ocean calmed. Fishing improved. Wildflowers appeared across portions of the island. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The biggest surprise was that very little actually changed. Liam still woke before sunrise, still checked fishing lines, still repaired sections of the shack, still carried water from the spring. Ownership didn't make survival easier. It simply made the island officially his. One evening, as the sun dipped toward the horizon, Captain Henry joined him on the beach. The old fisherman carried 2 mugs of coffee. They sat together watching seabirds drift across the water. "Funny thing," Henry said. "What?" Liam asked. Henry pointed toward the island. "Everybody spent years wondering who owned this place." Liam smiled. Turns out the island was wondering the same thing. The old fisherman laughed. "Maybe." Silence settled comfortably between them. Waves rolled against the shore. The shack stood quietly among the trees. Smoke drifted from its chimney. It no longer looked abandoned. It looked lived in. Loved, even. Eventually, Henry stood and prepared to leave. Before climbing into his boat, he paused. "You know," he said, "most people spend their lives searching for where they belong." Liam looked across Black Gull Island. The spring, the old well, the hidden cave, the cliffs, the forest trails. Every challenge, every storm, every discovery. They had all led him here. "I think I got lucky," he replied. Henry smiled. "No." He glanced toward the island one final time. "I think you came home." As darkness settled across the bay, Liam remained on the beach, watching the stars appear overhead. Months earlier, he arrived with nothing except a rowboat and a few bags of supplies. He thought he was searching for survival. Instead, he found something far more valuable: a history, a family, a purpose. The mystery of Black Gull Island was never really about ownership. It was about belonging. And for a poor boy who once believed nobody in the world was waiting for him, that discovery turned out to be the greatest treasure of all.